$17,000? You stole it, didn't you? The sharp voice of a white bank manager cuts through the tense air, accusing a young black girl who stands poised, unshaken. Amara Johnson, just 17, faces a storm of suspicion as she tries to deposit her hard-earned $17,000. The manager, convinced she's thwarting a crime, escalates the situation, calling the FBI while customers whip out their phones, filming the showdown. But who is Amara really? The dutiful daughter of an active-duty Army colonel, running a thriving tutoring business and managing her mother's savings. Will truth prevail over prejudice? What's your guess? How will this explosive confrontation unfold? Hit that subscribe button, share where you're tuning in from, and what time it is there. Drop your predictions below and stick around to see if you're right. This is a story you won't want to miss. The polished marble floors of National Bank gleamed under the fluorescent lights, reflecting the hurried shuffle of feet and the low hum of conversations. Tellers tapped at keyboards, their screens casting pale glows, while a line of customers snaked through the velvet ropes, clutching deposit slips and muttering about their day. The air carried the faint scent of coffee and ink, punctuated by the rhythmic whir of a money-counting machine behind the counter. At the front of the line stood Amara Johnson, a 17-year-old black girl whose presence seemed to command the space around her. Her braided hair was neatly swept into a bun, and her navy blazer, crisp white shirt, and pressed slacks spoke of a maturity far beyond her years. In her hands she held a stack of cash, $17,000, meticulously counted and clipped, her posture steady, her dark eyes calm but resolute. Amara stepped forward as the teller, a young woman with a name tag reading Sarah, flashed a polite smile. "Good morning. How can I assist you?" Sarah's voice was warm, routine. "I'd like to deposit this into my savings account," Amara said, sliding the stack of bills across the counter. Her tone was even, professional, as if she'd done this 100 times before. Sarah's eyes widened slightly, her fingers hesitating over the cash. $17,000? She repeated, her voice catching. She glanced at Amara, then back at the money, her smile faltering. I just need to follow protocol for a deposit this size. Let me get my manager." Amara nodded, unfazed, though she caught the subtle shift in Sarah's demeanor, a flicker of curiosity, perhaps unease. The teller tapped a button on her phone, murmuring into the receiver. Around Amara, the bank buzzed with its usual rhythm. A man in a suit checked his watch, a woman juggled a toddler while signing a check, and an elderly couple whispered about interest rates. Yet Amara felt the weight of eyes beginning to linger. A businessman in line glanced at her, his brow furrowing as he noted the cash. A young woman with earbuds tilted her phone as if debating whether to record. Minutes ticked by, each second marked by the faint tick-tock of a wall clock. Amara's fingers grazed the strap of her backpack, her only tell of impatience. She'd been here before? Not this bank, but this moment where her presence seemed to demand explanation. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. "Hold your head high, Amara. Let them stare." She straightened, her gaze fixed on the counter. The click of heels announced the arrival of Mrs. Caldwell, the branch manager. A white woman in her 50s, her blonde hair was pulled into a severe bun, her tailored suit as sharp as her expression. Her blue eyes swept over Amara, lingering on her face, her clothes, the stack of cash. The scrutiny was palpable, like a cold wind cutting through the room. Mrs. Caldwell's lips pressed into a thin line, her voice low and edged with suspicion. $17,000? That's quite a sum for someone like you. Amara's jaw tightened, but her voice remained steady. "It's from my tutoring business and my mother's savings. I'm depositing it into my account." Mrs. Caldwell raised an eyebrow, her skepticism carved into every line of her face. "A tutoring business?" she said, her tone dripping with doubt. "At your age? I've been in this industry for 25 years, young lady. I know when something doesn't add up." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a near whisper, but loud enough for the nearest customers to hear. "Where did you really get this money?" The words landed like a slap, and the air in the bank shifted. The businessman in line tilted his head, his curiosity now undisguised. The young woman with earbuds pulled one out, her phone subtly aimed at Amara. Whispers rippled through the crowd, a soft chorus of speculation. Amara felt the familiar sting of being seen not as herself, but as a stereotype. Yet she held her ground, her eyes locked on Mrs. Caldwell's. "It's legitimate," she said, her voice clear, unwavering. "I can provide documentation if needed." Mrs. Caldwell's smile was thin, almost predatory. "Documentation," she echoed, as if the word itself were a joke. She turned to Sarah, her voice rising just enough to carry. "Run a background check on her. I want to see if she's got a record. Petty theft, fraud, anything." The accusation hung in the air, bold and baseless, and the whispers grew louder. A man in a construction vest muttered, "That's a lot of cash for a kid." The woman with the toddler glanced away, uncomfortable but silent. Amara's heart pounded, not from fear but from the weight of injustice pressing against her chest. She knew this moment, knew the way eyes narrowed, the way assumptions hardened into truth before she could speak. But she remembered her mother's voice again. "Fam giangai kaki doilan luajan." Dignity, even under fire. She adjusted her blazer, her fingers steady, and met Mrs. Caldwell's gaze with a quiet defiance that seemed to unsettle the older woman. Sarah hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Ma'am, should I?" she began. But Mrs. Caldwell cut her off with a sharp gesture. "Do it!" she snapped, her eyes never leaving Amara. The manager stepped back, folding her arms, her posture radiating certainty. The bank felt smaller now, the walls closing in as more customers turned to watch, their phones glinting like tiny mirrors. Amara stood alone at the counter, the stack of bills untouched, a silent testament to her truth. But the storm was brewing, and she sensed it. Something bigger was coming, something that would turn this moment on its head. What did you think would happen next? Would Amara crumble under the weight of suspicion, or was there more to her story than met the eye? Hit that subscribe button, share where you're watching from, and let me know your predictions. This is only the beginning, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming. The hum of the National Bank had morphed into a charged murmur, like static before a storm. Amara Johnson stood at the counter, her $17,000 still untouched, a silent challenge to the piercing gaze of Mrs. Caldwell. The manager's accusation hung heavy, her words, petty theft, fraud, anything, echoing in the minds of the onlookers. The crowd's whispers grew sharper, a chorus of doubt weaving through the air. A businessman in a pinstripe suit leaned toward his neighbor, muttering, "She's too young for that kind of money." A young woman with earbuds, her phone still angled toward Amara, smirked as if she'd stumbled upon a spectacle. The weight of their stares pressed against Amara's skin, but she stood taller, her dark eyes unwavering, her hands steady on the counter. She wouldn't break, not here, not now. Mrs. Caldwell, emboldened by the crowd's murmurs, leaned closer, her voice a venomous hiss. "You expect me to believe a girl like you earned this through tutoring?" She spat the word like it was absurd, her blue eyes narrowing. "I've seen your type before, thinking you can walk in here with a story and a stack of cash, and I'll just look the other way. Not on my watch." She straightened, her bun gleaming under the lights, and turned to Sarah, the teller, who was frozen at her keyboard. "What's taking so long? Pull up her record. I want every detail." Sarah's fingers trembled as she typed, her eyes darting between her screen and Amara. It's loading, ma'am," she stammered, her voice barely audible. Amara caught the flicker of unease in Sarah's expression, a crack in the facade of compliance. The teller wasn't fully on board with her boss's crusade, but she was too junior to push back. Amara offered her a small, reassuring nod, as if to say, "I don't blame you." Sarah looked away, her cheeks flushing. The crowd's attention intensified. A man in a construction vest pulled out his phone, joining the young woman in filming, his lens trained on Amara's unflinching face. A mother with a toddler whispered to another customer, "Why would she bring that much cash if it's legit?" The words stung, but Amara let them slide off her like water. Inside, a familiar ache stirred, the same one she'd felt when teachers assumed she'd cheat, when store clerks followed her down aisles. Her mother's voice rang clear in her mind. Pham Ngai Kaki Doi Lan Luajan. Dignity under fire. She adjusted her blazer, her movements deliberate, and spoke, her voice calm but cutting. My tutoring business, Elite Minds, is registered. I have receipts, client contracts, everything. Would you like to see them? Mrs. Caldwell's laugh was sharp, a blade slicing through the air. Receipts? Contracts? She mocked, loud enough for the crowd to hear. Cute, but I don't buy it. Girls like you don't just have businesses. You're hiding something, and I'll find out what. She turned to the crowd, her arms crossed, playing to her audience. This bank has standards. We don't let just anyone waltz in with dirty money. The words hit like a punch, and the crowd's murmurs swelled. A teenage boy in a hoodie snickered, whispering to his friend, "She's done for." An older woman in a floral dress nodded approvingly at Mrs. Caldwell, muttering, "Good for her, keeping things in order." But not everyone was convinced. A young black man in a delivery uniform standing near the back shook his head, his jaw tight. He caught Amara's eye for a fleeting moment, a silent acknowledgement of the injustice unfolding. Amara held his gaze, drawing strength from that small connection. Inside, her heart raced, not from fear, but from the fire of indignation. She'd built elite minds from nothing. Late nights crafting lesson plans, tutoring kids of military families, saving every dollar to honor her mother's trust. This wasn't just money, it was her pride, her proof. And yet, here she was, reduced to a suspect because of her skin and her youth. She wanted to shout, to lay every receipt on the counter and watch Mrs. Caldwell choke on her words, but she remembered her mother's lessons. Let your actions speak louder than their lies. She took a slow breath, her fingers brushing the edge of her backpack, where her business documents were neatly filed. Mrs. Caldwell, sensing Amara's composure, grew more agitated. "Don't stand there acting innocent," she snapped, her voice rising. "You think you can fool me with that calm act? I'm calling this in. We'll see what the authorities have to say." She reached for the phone on the counter, her movements sharp, almost theatrical. The crowd leaned in, phones raised higher, capturing every second of the confrontation. The air crackled with anticipation, the tension so thick it seemed to hum. Amara's eyes narrowed, but her voice remained steady. "Call whoever you want, Mrs. Caldwell. I'm not afraid of the truth." The words were a quiet challenge, delivered with a precision that made Sarah pause mid-type, her eyes flicking to Amara with a mix of awe and nervousness. The crowd's murmurs faltered for a moment, as if Amara's confidence had thrown them off balance. The young black man in the delivery uniform gave a subtle nod, his lips twitching into a faint smile. Mrs. Caldwell's hand hovered over the phone, her face a mask of righteous fury. She was certain she held the upper hand, that this was her moment to shine as the gatekeeper of justice. But Amara stood unmoved, her gaze locked on the manager's, a silent promise that the truth was coming, and it would hit harder than any accusation. The bank felt like a stage, the spotlight burning, and the next act was about to begin. What do you think Amara's next move will be? Will she crumble under the growing pressure, or is there a secret she's holding close? Drop your predictions below, hit subscribe, and tell me where you're tuning in from. What time is it there? This story's about to explode, and you won't want to miss a single second. The air in National Bank crackled with tension. The crowd's murmurs a low, restless hum as Mrs. Caldwell's hand lingered over the phone, her threat to call the authorities hanging like a guillotine. Amara Johnson stood resolute, her dark eyes unyielding, the $17,000 still untouched on the counter. The crowd's phones glinted, capturing every second of her defiance, their lenses trained on her like vultures circling prey. But Amara's composure held firm, a quiet storm brewing beneath her calm exterior. She knew the truth was her shield, and she was ready to wield it. The young black man in the delivery uniform gave her another subtle nod from the back, his silent support a flicker of light in the growing darkness of suspicion. As Mrs. Caldwell began dialing, her lips curled in a triumphant smirk, a new figure shuffled to the adjacent counter. Tyler, a 17-year-old white boy in a rumpled hoodie and torn jeans, slouched forward, his backpack slung carelessly over one shoulder. His shaggy blonde hair fell into his eyes and his sneakers scuffed the marble floor. He dumped a messy stack of cash, $14,000 crumpled and haphazard onto the counter, barely glancing at the teller, a middle-aged man named Greg. "Yo, I need to deposit this," Tyler mumbled, his voice low, almost bored. Greg raised an eyebrow but nodded, his fingers moving swiftly to count the bills. "Sure thing," he said, his tone casual, as if a teenager dropping thousands in cash was just another Tuesday. He didn't ask for ID, didn't call a manager, didn't even pause. The transaction flowed as smoothly as water, the money disappearing into the system with a few clicks. Tyler leaned against the counter, scrolling his phone, oblivious to the drama unfolding mere feet away. Mrs. Caldwell, still clutching her phone, didn't spare him a glance. Her entire focus remained locked on Amara, her perceived threat. The contrast was glaring, a knife twisting in Amara's chest. She saw it all: the ease of Tyler's transaction, the absence of scrutiny, the way Greg's shoulders stayed relaxed while Sarah, her teller, still fumbled nervously under Mrs. Caldwell's glare. Amara's fingers tightened briefly on her backpack strap, the sting of injustice sharp but familiar. She'd seen this before, the world bending one way for some, another for others. Her mother's words echoed again. "Let their ignorance fuel your strength." She loosened her grip, her face a mask of resolve, but her eyes flicked to Tyler, catching the way his hand twitched as he stuffed his phone back into his pocket. The crowd, too, seemed blind to Tyler. The businessman in the pinstripe suit, still filming Amara, didn't even glance at the boy. The young woman with earbuds kept her phone angled at Amara, her smirk unchanged. Only the young black man in the delivery uniform noticed, his brow furrowing as he watched Tyler's transaction sail through. He caught Amara's eye again, shaking his head slightly as if to say, "Can you believe this?" Amara's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but a shared understanding passed between them. Mrs. Caldwell hung up the phone with a flourish, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "The authorities are on their way," she announced, her tone dripping with authority. "We'll see who's telling the truth, young lady." She folded her arms, her eyes boring into Amara, who met her gaze without flinching. "I've dealt with enough liars in my time to know one when I see one," Mrs. Caldwell added, her words aimed as much at the crowd as at Amara. The businessman nodded approvingly, his phone still rolling. The mother with the toddler whispered, "She's got to be careful with this kind of thing." Amara's voice was steady, a quiet blade. "I've told you the truth, Mrs. Caldwell. My business is legitimate. My mother's savings are clean. You'll see." Her words carried a weight that silenced the crowd for a moment, the conviction in her tone forcing a few to lower their phones, their certainty wavering. Sarah, still at her keyboard, glanced up, her eyes wide with a mix of guilt and admiration. Even the teenage boy in the hoodie stopped snickering, his friend nudging him as if sensing a shift. Tyler, meanwhile, grabbed his receipt from Greg and turned to leave, his movements quick, almost furtive. His eyes darted toward the exit, and for a split second, they met Amara's. She saw it, a flicker of unease, a shadow of something hidden. He looked away fast, pulling his hoodie tighter, his steps hurried. Amara's mind sharpened, cataloging the detail, but she said nothing. Her focus returned to Mrs. Caldwell, whose smirk had faltered slightly at Amara's unshakable calm. The crowd's murmurs resumed, but now they carried a new edge: curiosity, doubt, anticipation. The young black man in the delivery uniform leaned forward, his eyes locked on Amara, as if willing her to keep standing tall. The air felt heavier, charged with the promise of something explosive. Mrs. Caldwell, oblivious to Tyler's departure, stepped closer to Amara, her voice low and menacing. "You can talk all you want, but the truth comes out when the cuffs go on." Amara's eyes glinted, a spark of defiance. "Then let's wait for it," she said, her voice soft but unyielding. The crowd held its breath, sensing the storm about to break. The bank's marble walls seemed to close in, the clocks ticking louder now, each second a step closer to reckoning. What's brewing beneath Amara's calm facade? Will Mrs. Caldwell's gamble pay off, or is she walking into a trap of her own making? Drop your predictions below, hit that subscribe button, and share where you're watching from. What time is it there? The stage is set, and this story's about to take a turn you won't see coming. The tension in National Bank coiled tighter, a spring ready to snap. Amara Johnson stood at the counter, her $17,000 a silent testament to her truth, while Mrs. Caldwell's accusation reverberated through the crowd. The manager's phone call to the authorities had set the stage for a showdown, and the air buzzed with anticipation, the crowd's whispers sharp as static. Phones remained raised, their lenses glinting like predators' eyes capturing Amara's every move. The young black man in the delivery uniform stood firm at the back, his gaze a quiet anchor of support. Tyler, the boy in the hoodie, had slipped out moments ago, his hurried exit unnoticed by all but Amara, whose sharp eyes had caught the unease in his step. Now the bank felt like a pressure cooker, and Amara was at its center, unyielding. Mrs. Caldwell paced before the counter, her heels clicking like a metronome counting down to judgment. Her blonde bun gleamed under the fluorescent lights, her face alight with the certainty of victory. "You can stand there looking calm all you want," she said, her voice loud enough to carry to the back of the room. "But I've seen through your act. The FBI will be here any minute, and we'll get to the bottom of this." She turned to the crowd, her arms crossed, playing to their murmurs of agreement. The businessman in the pinstripe suit nodded, his phone still recording. The mother with the toddler whispered, "She's got to protect the bank, right?" Amara's heart thudded, not from fear but from the fire of defiance burning brighter with each accusation. She'd faced this before, eyes that judged, voices that assumed, but never on a stage this public. Her mother's words echoed, steadying her. "Let their ignorance fuel your strength." She adjusted her stance, her navy blazer crisp against the chaos, and met Mrs. Caldwell's gaze. "I've told you everything," she said, her voice clear, cutting through the murmurs like a blade. "My business, Elite Minds, is real. My mother's savings are clean. Call whoever you need to. I'm not hiding." The crowd stirred, her confidence unsettling their assumptions. The young woman with earbuds lowered her phone slightly, her smirk fading. The teenage boy in the hoodie who'd been snickering earlier shifted uncomfortably, his friend nudging him to stay quiet. Sarah, the teller, glanced up from her screen, her fingers still on the keyboard, her eyes flickering with doubt. She hadn't found anything in Amara's record, and Mrs. Caldwell's insistence was starting to feel like a vendetta. "Ma'am," Sarah ventured softly, "the system's not showing any—" "Keep looking," Mrs. Caldwell snapped, her voice cracking like a whip. She spun back to Amara, her eyes blazing. "You think you can outsmart me? I've been in this game too long. I know money like that doesn't just appear. Not from someone like you." The words dripped with venom, and the crowd's murmurs surged, a mix of agreement and unease. The businessman muttered, "She's got a point." But the young black man in the delivery uniform clenched his fists, his jaw tight, as if fighting the urge to speak. Amara felt the weight of every stare, every whispered judgment, but she refused to bend. She reached into her backpack, her movements deliberate, and pulled out her phone. Her fingers moved swiftly, typing a message to a contact labeled "Emergency Colonel Johnson, Protocol Eagle, National Bank." "Now." She hit send, her face unreadable, but her eyes burned with a quiet resolve. The crowd didn't notice, too caught up in Mrs. Caldwell's performance, but Sarah caught the motion, her brow furrowing. Amara slipped the phone back into her pocket, her posture unwavering, as if she'd just lit a fuse. Mrs. Caldwell, oblivious, leaned forward, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You're done, young lady. When the FBI gets here, you'll wish you'd never walked into my bank." She straightened, turning to the crowd with a flourish, as if expecting applause. A few nodded, but others hesitated, Amara's calm defiance planting seeds of doubt. The young black man in the delivery uniform stepped closer, his eyes locked on Amara, as if willing her to hold the line. The bank's clock ticked louder, each second a heartbeat in the charged silence. The crowd's phones hovered, their owners torn between judgment and curiosity. Sarah's screen glowed with Amara's clean record, but she stayed silent, caught between her boss's fury and her own uncertainty. Amara stood like a statue, her gaze locked on Mrs. Caldwell, a silent promise that the truth was coming, and it would be louder than any accusation. The air felt electric, the weight of what was to come pressing against every surface. Mrs. Caldwell's smirk returned, her confidence unshaken. "Any minute now," she said, her voice ringing with triumph. "You'll see what happens when you try to play games in my bank." But Amara's eyes glinted, a spark of something unbreakable. She said nothing, letting the manager's words echo into the void. The crowd leaned in, sensing the storm about to break, their phones ready to capture the fallout. What's Amara's secret weapon? Will Mrs. Caldwell's triumph hold, or is she about to face a reckoning? Drop your predictions below, hit that subscribe button, and share where you're watching from. What time is it there? The truth is coming, and it's going to hit like a thunderbolt. Don't blink, you won't want to miss this. The National Bank pulsed with a restless energy, the crowd's murmurs swelling like a tide ready to crash. Amara Johnson stood unwavering at the counter, her $17,000 a silent defiance against Mrs. Caldwell's venomous accusations. The manager's call to the FBI had ignited a firestorm of anticipation, and every eye was on Amara, phones raised like torches in a mob. The young black man in the delivery uniform stood firm at the back, his gaze a beacon of solidarity. Mrs. Caldwell paced, her heels clicking with predatory rhythm, her blonde bun a crown of self-righteous certainty. "Any second now," she declared, her voice a taunt aimed at Amara. "The truth will come out, and you'll regret setting foot in here." The crowd leaned in, their whispers a mix of agreement and unease, the air thick with the promise of reckoning. Amara's face remained a mask of calm, but her heart thundered, fueled by the fire of injustice. She'd sent her message, Protocol Eagle, and now she waited, her mother's words her anchor. "Let their ignorance fuel your strength." Her navy blazer was a shield, her posture unyielding, but her eyes glinted with a quiet certainty that unnerved Sarah, the teller, who hovered nervously at her keyboard. Sarah's screen still showed Amara's clean record, but she stayed silent, caught in the crossfire of her boss's crusade. The crowd's phones captured every moment, their lenses glinting under the fluorescent lights, a silent jury ready to judge. The clock's ticking grew louder, each second a pulse in the charged silence. Mrs. Caldwell's smirk widened, her arms crossed as she addressed the crowd like a prosecutor closing a case. "I've seen it all in my 25 years, she said, her voice booming. "People think they can walk in with a story and a wad of cash, but I always know. This girl's no different." The businessman in the pinstripe suit nodded, his phone steady. The mother with the toddler whispered, "She's just doing her job." But the young black man in the delivery uniform clenched his fists, his eyes never leaving Amara, as if willing her to stand taller. Then the heavy glass doors of the bank swung open with a sharp creak, slicing through the tension like a blade. Two men in crisp black suits strode in, their presence commanding the room. Special Agent Miller, tall and broad-shouldered, led the way, his face carved from stone, a wireless earpiece glinting in his ear. Special Agent Davis followed, his eyes scanning the crowd with the precision of a hawk. The air seemed to thicken, the crowd's murmurs faltering as the men's polished shoes echoed on the marble floor. Mrs. Caldwell's face lit up, her triumph palpable. "Finally!" she exclaimed, rushing forward, her heels clattering. "Officers, thank God you're here. This girl," she pointed at Amara, her finger trembling with zeal. "She's trying to deposit $17,000 in dirty money. I've got her dead to rights." The crowd held its breath, phones raised higher, capturing the moment. The young woman with earbuds leaned forward, her smirk replaced by wide-eyed anticipation. The teenage boy in the hoodie nudged his friend, whispering, "She's toast now." But Amara stood still, her gaze locked on Agent Miller, a flicker of recognition passing between them. The young black man in the delivery uniform stepped closer, his expression tense but hopeful. Agent Miller ignored Mrs. Caldwell, his eyes fixed on Amara. He stopped a few feet from her, his posture rigid, and then, in a moment that froze the room, he snapped to attention, raising his hand in a crisp military salute. "Miss Johnson," he said, his voice deep and resonant, carrying a weight that silenced every whisper. Agent Davis mirrored the gesture, his salute equally precise, his eyes shining with respect. The bank fell into a deathly hush, the only sound the faint hum of the air conditioning. Phones wavered, some dropping as their owners gaped, stunned. The businessman's jaw fell open, his camera tilting. The mother with the toddler gasped, clutching her child tighter. Mrs. Caldwell froze, her outstretched arm trembling, her face draining of color. "What? What are you doing?" she stammered, her voice cracking. The crowd's eyes darted between her and Amara, confusion rippling through them. The young black man in the delivery uniform broke into a grin, his fists unclenching. Sarah behind the counter stared at Amara, her mouth slightly open, as if seeing her for the first time. Amara returned the agent's salute with a subtle nod, her composure unbroken, but her eyes alight with a quiet triumph. She said nothing, letting the moment speak for itself. The crowd's phones, once weapons of judgment, now captured a scene they couldn't comprehend. The young woman with earbuds lowered her device, her face flushed with shame. The teenage boy muttered, "What the hell?" to his friend who just shook his head. Mrs. Caldwell's voice rose, desperate now. "This is a mistake. She's a fraud." But her words sounded hollow, drowned by the weight of the agent's presence. Agent Miller turned to her, his gaze cold as steel, and said nothing, his silence more damning than any accusation. The bank felt smaller, the walls closing in on Mrs. Caldwell as her certainty crumbled. Amara stood tall, the $17,000 still on the counter, a beacon of truth in a sea of doubt. Who is Amara really, and what power does she hold? Will Mrs. Caldwell's house of cards collapse? Drop your predictions below, hit that subscribe button, and share where you're watching from. What time is it there? The truth is about to explode, and you won't want to miss the fallout. The National Bank stood frozen in the wake of the FBI agent's salute, a moment that shattered the air like glass. Amara Johnson, poised at the counter, her $17,000 untouched, met Special Agent Miller's gaze with a quiet nod, her eyes gleaming with unspoken victory. The crowd, their phones wavering, gaped in stunned silence, their whispers swallowed by the weight of what they'd just witnessed. Mrs. Caldwell's face was a mask of shock, her outstretched arm dropping as if unmoored, her blonde bun slightly askew. What is this?" she stammered, her voice a fragile thread, unraveling before the crowd. The young black man in the delivery uniform grinned wider, his eyes bright with pride, while Sarah, the teller, stared at Amara, her hands frozen on her keyboard, as if seeing a hero emerge from the shadows. Agent Miller stepped forward, his presence commanding, his voice low but resonant, cutting through the silence like a blade. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, his tone icy, "you've accused Amara Johnson, the only daughter of Colonel Eva Johnson, an active duty hero leading a classified intelligence unit overseas." The words landed like a thunderclap and the crowd gasped, phones tilting as they scrambled to process the revelation. "The $17,000 you called dirty comes from Amara's tutoring company, Elite Minds, which she founded and runs, serving military families across the country. The rest is her mother's savings, vetted at the highest security levels." The bank erupted in murmurs, shock rippling through the crowd. The businessman in the pinstripe suit lowered his phone, his face flushed with embarrassment. The mother with the toddler whispered, "Oh my God, she's a colonel's daughter?" The young woman with earbuds let her phone fall to her side, her smirk gone, replaced by a look of shame. Amara stood still, her navy blazer a symbol of her unshakable dignity, but her lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. She didn't need to speak. The truth was doing that for her. Mrs. Caldwell's face crumpled, her certainty dissolving like ash. "But that's impossible," she whispered, her voice barely audible, her hands gripping the counter for support. "I checked. I was sure." Her words trailed off, drowned by the crowd's shifting tide. The young black man in the delivery uniform let out a soft, triumphant laugh, shaking his head as if to say, "You should have known better." Then a sharp movement caught Agent Davis's eye. Near the glass doors, a figure in a rumpled hoodie hesitated, his hand on the handle. Tyler, the boy who'd breezed through his $14,000 deposit, froze under Davis's gaze. "Hold it right there," Davis called, his voice a whip crack that stopped Tyler cold. The crowd turned, phones swiveling, as Davis strode toward him, pulling a phone from his pocket and comparing Tyler's face to a grainy security still. "Tyler Peterson," he said, his tone lethal. You're under arrest for the theft of $50,000 from an electronics store 3 days ago. The serial numbers on your deposit matched the stolen cash. The revelation hit like a lightning bolt. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath that sucked the air from the room. The teenage boy in the hoodie, who'd mocked Amara earlier, dropped his phone, his jaw slack. "No way," he muttered, his friends staring wide-eyed. The businessman's face turned ashen, his camera now trained on Tyler, who stood paralyzed, his hoodie slipping to reveal a sheen of sweat on his forehead. I didn't," Tyler stammered, but Davis was already on him, snapping cuffs on his wrists with a metallic click that echoed in the stunned silence. Mrs. Caldwell's legs buckled, and she sank against the counter, her hands trembling. I didn't know," she whispered, her voice a broken plea. The crowd's murmurs turned to outrage, their phones now capturing Tyler's arrest. The irony too stark to ignore. The young woman with earbuds shook her head, muttering, "We were all wrong." The mother with the toddler clutched her child, her eyes darting to Amara with newfound respect. Agent Miller turned to Mrs. Caldwell, his gaze unrelenting. "You targeted an innocent young woman based on nothing but prejudice," he said, his voice carrying a quiet fury. "You ignored the real criminal right under your nose." The words were a gut punch, and Mrs. Caldwell flinched, her face a mask of horror. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, some shaking their heads, others whispering apologies to no one in particular. Amara stepped forward, her voice soft but piercing. "I told you the truth, Mrs. Caldwell," she said, her eyes locking onto the manager's. "But you didn't want to hear it." She reached into her backpack, pulling out a sleek business card for elite minds and placing it on the counter. "For your next lesson in fairness, you might need this." The crowd fell silent, then erupted in scattered applause, led by the young black man, whose claps rang out like a battle cry. The bank felt alive now, the air electric with the weight of truth. Tyler was led toward the doors, his head bowed, while Amara stood tall, the $17,000 a beacon of her integrity. Mrs. Caldwell stared at the business card, her world collapsing in real time. How will Mrs. Caldwell face the consequences of her actions? Can Amara's victory spark real change? Drop your predictions below, hit that subscribe button, and share where you're watching from. What time is it there? The storm's not over yet, and you won't want to miss the next move. The National Bank buzzed with a raw electric energy, the crowd's murmurs a chaotic symphony of shock and shame. Amara Johnson stood at the counter, her $17,000 now a symbol of vindication, her business card gleaming like a quiet rebuke on the polished marble. Tyler's arrest had flipped the script, his cuffed wrists and bowed head, a stark contrast to Amara's unyielding dignity. The crowd's phones, once weapons of judgment, now captured the wreckage of their assumptions, their lenses darting between Tyler's retreat and Mrs. Caldwell's collapse. The manager leaned against the counter, her face ashen, her blonde bun fraying as her world unraveled. The young black man in the delivery uniform clapped slowly, his grin a beacon of triumph, while Sarah, the teller, stared at Amara with wide-eyed awe, her hands still frozen on her keyboard. Mrs. Caldwell's voice trembled, barely a whisper. I was just doing my job," she stammered, her eyes darting to the crowd, seeking allies but finding none. The businessman in the pinstripe suit averted his gaze, his phone now pocketed. The young woman with earbuds shook her head, muttering, "We messed up." The mother with the toddler clutched her child, her face flushed with guilt. Amara stood serene, her navy blazer crisp, her dark eyes steady. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. The truth had spoken louder than any accusation. The glass doors swung open again, this time with a softer creak, but the sound cut through the tension like a blade. A man in a tailored gray suit stormed in, his face etched with urgency. His name tag read, "Mr. Reynolds, Regional Vice President," and his presence silenced the crowd. His salt and pepper hair was slightly disheveled, his tie loosened as if he'd rushed from a meeting. Sweat beaded on his brow, his eyes scanning the scene before locking onto Amara. He strode forward, his polished shoes clicking with purpose, and stopped before her, his expression a mix of regret and resolve. "Miss Johnson," he said, his voice steady but heavy with sincerity, On behalf of National Bank, I offer you and your family our deepest apologies. This incident is unacceptable, and we take full responsibility. The crowd murmured, some nodding, others still grappling with their shame. The young black man in the delivery uniform crossed his arms, his nod approving but guarded. Sarah exhaled, her shoulders sagging with relief, as if the vice president's words had lifted a weight. Amara met Mr. Reynolds' gaze, her expression calm but unyielding. "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds," she said, her voice clear, carrying a quiet strength. "But I only wanted to be treated like any other customer." The simplicity of her words hit hard, and the crowd fell silent, their phones lowering further. The teenage boy in the hoodie whispered to his friend, "She's got guts." The mother with the toddler wiped her eyes, her child oblivious to the gravity of the moment. Mr. Reynolds turned to Mrs. Caldwell, his face hardening. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, his voice like steel, "your actions were not just a procedural error, they were a moral failure. Your prejudice has tarnished this bank's reputation and wronged an innocent young woman." He paused, letting the words sink in. The crowd's murmurs grew, a mix of agreement and disbelief. "You are terminated, effective immediately. Clear your desk and leave." Mrs. Caldwell's knees buckled, and she gripped the counter, her face crumpling like paper. "Mr. Reynolds, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I thought I was protecting the bank." But her plea was hollow, drowned by the crowd's shifting tide. The young woman with earbuds shook her head, muttering, "She brought this on herself." The businessman turned away, his face red with secondhand embarrassment. Mrs. Caldwell's hands trembled as she gathered her things, her once authoritative presence reduced to a shadow. Amara watched, her expression unreadable, but her eyes held a flicker of something deeper. Not triumph, but resolve. She turned to Sarah, who still stood frozen, and nodded gently. "Can we finish my deposit now?" she asked, her voice steady, as if the chaos around her was just a passing storm. Sarah blinked, snapping out of her daze, and nodded quickly. "Yes, of course, Miss Johnson," she said, her fingers flying over the keyboard with newfound purpose. The crowd watched, some whispering apologies, others still processing the reversal. As Sarah processed the $17,000, the bank felt different, quieter, heavier, but also lighter, as if the truth had cleared the air. The young black man in the delivery uniform approached Amara, his voice low but warm. "You handled that like a queen," he said, offering a fist bump. Amara returned it, her faint smile a spark of connection. The crowd began to disperse, some slipping out quietly, their phones now silent, their judgment replaced by reflection. Mr. Reynolds lingered, his eyes on Amara. "We'll make this right," he said, his voice firm. "Training, policies, whatever it takes." Amara nodded, her gaze steady. "Just make sure it doesn't happen again," she said, her words a quiet command. She took her receipt from Sarah, her movements deliberate, and turned toward the doors, her head high. The bank's marble walls seemed to hold their breath as Amara prepared to leave, her victory undeniable. But what would her next step be? Could this moment spark lasting change? Drop your predictions below, hit that subscribe button, and share where you're watching from. What time is it there? Amara's story isn't over, and the final chapter will leave you speechless. The National Bank exhaled as the storm of confrontation settled, its marble floors reflecting the soft glow of fluorescent lights. Amara Johnson stood at the counter, her deposit of $17,000 finally processed, the receipt in her hand a quiet testament to her triumph. The crowd, once a jury of whispers and raised phones, now dispersed in hushed reflection, their faces a mix of awe and shame. Mrs. Caldwell had vanished into the back office, her termination a fresh wound, her once commanding presence reduced to a memory. The young black man in the delivery uniform lingered near the door, his nod to Amara a silent salute as she prepared to leave. Sarah, the teller, watched her with newfound respect, her fingers still trembling from the weight of what had unfolded. The air felt cleaner, as if truth had swept away the fog of prejudice. Amara adjusted her navy blazer, her braided bun as immaculate as ever, and turned toward the glass doors. The crowd parted, their eyes following her, no longer with suspicion, but with something closer to reverence. The businessman in the pinstripe suit, who'd filmed her ordeal, slipped his phone into his pocket, his face etched with regret. The young woman with earbuds approached hesitantly, her voice soft. "I'm sorry," she whispered, barely meeting Amara's gaze. "I shouldn't have. You know." Amara offered a small nod, her eyes kind but firm. "Just do better next time," she said, her voice steady, a lesson wrapped in grace. Outside, the midday sun bathed the street in gold, and as Amara stepped through the doors, the light caught her, casting a faint halo around her silhouette. She paused, taking a deep breath, the weight of the morning lifting with each exhale. Her phone buzzed, a text from her mother, Colonel Eva Johnson, stationed halfway across the globe. "Proud of you always. Keep shining." Amara's lips curved into a smile, her heart swelling. She typed a quick reply. "Did you proud today, Mom? I'll tell you everything soon." She slipped the phone into her pocket, her steps purposeful as she walked toward her car, the city humming around her. Back inside, Mr. Reynolds, the regional vice president, stood with Sarah, his voice low but resolute. "We're implementing mandatory training across all branches," he said, his eyes scanning the now quiet bank. "No one else should endure what Miss Johnson did." Sarah nodded, her expression solemn. "She was incredible," she said, her voice tinged with awe. The young black man in the delivery uniform, still by the door, overheard and grinned. "That's a queen right there," he said, loud enough for a few lingering customers to nod in agreement. The bank, once a stage for injustice, now felt like a classroom, its lesson etched into every surface. Amara's story didn't end at the bank's doors. By evening, clips of the confrontation, captured by the crowd's phones, had spread across social media, tagged with Shakti, justice for Amara. The video of Agents Miller and Davis saluting her went viral, shared thousands of times with captions like, "Never judge a book by its cover," and "This is what strength looks like." Elite Minds, her tutoring company, saw a surge in inquiries, military families across the country reaching out to support the young woman who'd stood tall against prejudice. Amara, back at her small office, fielded calls with the same calm she'd shown in the bank, her mission to educate and uplift growing stronger with each new client. Mrs. Caldwell, meanwhile, faced a different fate. Alone in her apartment, she sat staring at a box of her office belongings, her termination letter crumpled in her hand. The news had already spread, her name tied to the viral video, a cautionary tale of what prejudice could cost. She whispered to herself, "I was just doing my job." But the words felt empty, her reflection in the window a ghost of her former self. Tyler, too, faced consequences. His arrest was the lead story on local news. In a holding cell, he sat with his head in his hands, the weight of his choices crushing his bravado. The bank, determined to rebuild trust, rolled out its training program within weeks. Posters proclaiming fairness for all now lining its walls. Employees like Sarah attended sessions, their notebooks filled with lessons learned from Amara's ordeal. The young black man in the delivery uniform, whose name was Marcus, became a regular at Elite Minds, volunteering to mentor younger students. "You inspired me," he told Amara one day, his grin wide. "Showed me what standing up looks like." Amara, driving home under a starlit sky, felt the weight of the day settle into something new. Purpose. She wasn't just a girl who'd won a battle. She was a spark, igniting change. Her mother's words rang true. "Fam giangay, saki duoy lanluajan." Dignity under fire. She'd held hers, and now the world was listening. This isn't the end. What ripple effects will Amara's courage create? How will her story shape those who witnessed it? Drop your predictions below, hit that subscribe button, and share where you're watching from. What time is it there? Amara's light is still shining, and you won't want to miss where it leads next. And so, Amara Johnson walked away, her dignity a beacon that lit up the truth. From a bank counter to a viral sensation, her story exposed prejudice and proved that strength speaks louder than suspicion. What did you feel watching Amara face down injustice? Did her courage spark something in you? Drop your thoughts below, hit that subscribe button, and share where you're tuning in from. What time is it there? Your voice matters, and I can't wait to hear how this story hit you. Thank you for joining me on this journey through a lesson at National Bank. Your support keeps these stories alive, And I'm grateful to every one of you. Stay tuned for more tales that challenge, inspire, and remind us to see beyond the surface. Until next time, keep shining, and I'll see you in the next chapter.